we accept that you can separate boys and girls, and we are now looking at the definition of a girl, and we're saying only people who were girl assigned at birth.
At the end there, she's kind of close to getting it. Now, guys, we're going to catch up with the huge case the Supreme Court heard yesterday, Tuesday, about trans athletes. Of course, you had lawyers for the ACLU and other left-leaning representatives representing transgender identifying athletes who were born biologically male but identify as girls, who were suing to challenge various Republican state laws like Idaho and West Virginia, where they've passed laws that prohibit people who are born biologically male but identify as trans girls from participating in girls' and women's sports. Now, these activists sued and challenged these laws and said they constitute unlawful, unconstitutional discrimination against people because of their trans identity. This is being litigated, obviously, before the Supreme Court. They'll hand out a decision in a few months, but they had oral arguments on Tuesday. And I think these arguments did not go well for the activist lawyers. First of all, it's just objectively easy money. The Supreme Court rules against them in this case, but it was deeply revealing. And I listened to several hours, not the whole thing was like 4 hours. I didn't have time, but I listened to several hours of this. I listened to the justices interviewing and interrogating one of the solicitors for the defending the laws, and then one of the ACLU lawyers challenging the laws and arguing they're illegal. And oh boy, just all around, it was kind of a disaster. But it is still nice, I will say this, whenever I catch up on the Supreme Court, it's nice to hear civil intellectual debate and dialogue, right? It bears no resemblance to the other branches of government in that way. So I do appreciate that. But I'm just going to play you this first clip, which involves Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, who is a Democratic appointee appointed by President Biden, interrogating someone who is on behalf of the laws defending the bans on trans athletes from women's sports. Listen to this.
You have the overarching classification, everybody has to be, play on the team that is the same as their sex at birth. But then you have a gender identity definition that is operating within that, meaning a distinction, meaning that for cisgender girls, they can play consistent with their gender identity. For transgender girls, they can't.
So I think that, okay, so as to the part about your ability to pass over from boy to girl,
yes,
you can go from one way but not the other. I want to be clear that BPJ is not challenging that specific classification. I think that's important to start with. But I think, if anything, that's useful evidence as to the lack of a transgender-based discrimination, because if the legislature were just sort of unsettled by the notion of transgender athletes, I think the answer would have been to then bar them from passing over anyone consistent with their gender.
I appreciate that. I guess I was getting at the what I understood the Chief Justice to be trying to discuss, which was this notion that this is really just about the definition of we accept that you can separate boys and girls, and we are now looking at the definition of a girl, and we're saying only people who were girl assigned at birth.
At the end there, she's kind of close to getting it. Not quite, but we're getting there. Now, the problem is this passage that we listened to does unfortunately, it illustrates the problem with accepting some of this activist terminology, like assigned sex at birth. You just mean sex. You just mean your biological sex. When they say assigned sex, it doesn't matter what you were assigned, because doctors can make mistakes. It matters what you are. And let me try to translate what you heard, because obviously it's a bit in legalese. And you're hearing one of the liberal-leaning justices on the court, Ketanji Brown Jackson, go back and forth with the Solicitor General, the lawyer defending West Virginia in the case and defending their law banning trans athletes, identified girls who are born biologically male from girls' sports in West Virginia. And Ketanji Brown Jackson is suggesting that this discriminates on the basis of gender identity, because some girls are allowed but not others because of their gender identity. That is what she is saying. But the Solicitor General is replying, no, this law has no bearing on gender identity. It treats you differently based on your sex. which for sports is allowed. And he is, to me at least, obviously correct, because the difference that's being drawn in who can be allowed in sports is not actually about your gender identity. It's about your sex. So a male who identifies as trans can't play in women's sports. A male who doesn't identify as trans can't play in women's sports. A female who identifies as female can play in women's sports. A female who identifies as non-binary can still play in women's sports. A female who identifies as a man can still play in women's sports under this law. So they're not actually discriminating or treating differently on the basis of that gender identity. And the other thing he mentions in his reply is that if they were just trying to ban trans athletes, then they would also prohibit transgender boys who are biologically female. If they were just trying to punish trans people with these laws or just discriminate against them unduly, unfairly, they didn't really care about safety or fairness for girls. It was just about being mean to trans people. Then you would expect to see that they would impose similar rules on boys' sports. But I don't believe these states actually do in these laws that are before the court. I think that in boys' sports, trans boys who are biologically female are allowed to compete. So that to me is evidence that it's not just blatant discrimination and animus. And yes, it does matter what your definition of female is and of woman when you're discussing a case and debate over Title IX, which is the federal law that requires the existence of women and girls sports if male sports are offered. Then you obviously do have to define woman and female. And I can't believe it, but this is a running issue for progressives. And they've had years at this point and seemingly still can't come up with a workable definition. So here's another clip. And here you have Samuel Alito, one of the conservative Supreme Court justices, going back and forth with one of the left-wing attorneys for the ACLU. Listen to this.
Well, to pick up on the issue of discrimination on the basis of transgender status, let me go to some basics. Do you agree that a school may have separate teams for a category of students classified as boys and a category of students classified as girls?
Yes, Your Honor.
If it does that, then is it not necessary for there to be, for equal protection purposes, if that is challenged under the Equal Protection Clause, an understanding of what it means to be a boy or a girl or a man or a woman?
Yes, Your Honor.
And what is that definition? For equal protection purposes, what does it mean to be a boy or a girl or a man or a woman?
Sorry, I misunderstood your question. I think that the underlying enactment, whatever it was, the policy, the law, we'd have to have an understanding of how the state or the government was understanding that term to figure out whether or not someone was excluded. We do not have a definition for the court, and we don't take issue with we're not disputing the definition here. What we're saying is that the way it applies in practice is to exclude birth-sex males categorically from women's teams, and that there's a subset of those birth-sex males where it doesn't make sense to do so according to the state's own interest.
How can a court determine whether there's discrimination on the basis of sex without knowing what sex means for equal protection purposes?
I think here we just know that we basically know that that they've identified pursuant to their own statute, Lindsay qualifies as a birth-sex male, and she's being excluded categorically from the women's teams as the statute. So we're taking the statute's definitions as we find them, and we don't dispute them. We're just trying to figure out, do they create an equal protection problem?
Oh, gosh. I don't have an answer for you as to what's the definition of female. In a case about Title IX and about the Equal Protection Clause and discrimination on the basis of sex or on gender identity is hilarious, because it's like really not a trick question. You knew this one was coming and didn't have an answer for it. That's not great. Now, I guess what this person is trying to argue, what the ACLU is trying to argue, if I am to explain it, and this refers to the specifics of one of the trans athletes in this case, is that they're arguing that part of the reason these laws are discriminatory is that they apply even to males who have blocked their puberty with puberty blockers, then gone through hormone replacement therapy, and the ACLU argues don't have a competitive advantage as a result. But to me, that still doesn't prove they're being discriminated against for their gender identity, because they're still males based on the structure of their reproductive system, right? Which is how you define sex. And they are still, there's also a false premise there, which is that, well, if you block puberty, there's no differences between males and females. And that's actually not true. We talked about that a little bit on the show yesterday, but even prior to puberty, there is an athletic difference between boys and girls that they don't seem to really reckon with. And again, it all gets so muddled and confused when you cannot or will not provide a clear and coherent definition of woman, female, and girl in a case about women, female, and girls sports. And one of the other attorneys for the ACLU was asked about this outside the courtroom by, I believe, a Fox News reporter. Listen to this.
Josh, what is your definition of sex?
I don't think that's what's at issue in this case. What's at issue in this case is fair treatment for all kids. Sorry.
The mics, please.
Oh, yeah. I was just saying I don't think that's what is at issue in this case. What's at issue in this case is fair treatment for all people, including cis people and trans people. And that's what we're here to talk about today.
Why do you think it shouldn't be defined in this case?
I'm sorry. I can't believe they're actually going with sex isn't relevant and we don't need a definition of it in a case about Title IX and whether something is sex discrimination or gender identity discrimination. What the hell happened to the ACLU, by the way? This used to be a serious civil liberties organization, a free speech organization. Now they argue that now they literally can't tell you what biological sex means. They argue that even male violent criminals and sex offenders should be housed in women's prisons. Like, this is an organization that I'm sure still does some good work when it comes to different, criminal justice issues and ensuring fair criminal procedures and civil asset forfeiture and surveillance laws and other things that I'm sure I support. I'm somebody who's in favor of robust civil liberties. But on identitarian and social issues, they have truly lost the plot. And I actually I feel bad for genuine trans people who want to live just normal, happy, and free lives. That these are the representatives y'all ended up with, and the fact that they're even dying on this hill of challenging these laws rather than just saying, okay, sure, we'll compromise on trans sports, but you need to respect us and let us live our lives and be happy. Yeah, no, instead they're dying on the hill that males have a right to compete in women's sports. I'm sorry. Just with advocates like this, who needs enemies, really? They're doing so much harm reputationally and politically to the movement that they claim to care about and fundraise off very successfully. It's really sad. And I can't say I'm surprised at how poorly they performed during the oral arguments at the Supreme Court. But while I'm not surprised, I'm still concerned. Thankfully, though, I think common sense will almost certainly win the day on this one, but more of these issues will have to be hashed out, including ones where, the genuine freedoms of trans people may be at stake, and they really need to stop retaining the ACLU to represent them, please. I'm begging y'all. Find somebody else, somebody better, somebody who can at least answer basic questions. That's my suggestion from me to you. Free advice. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Make sure to subscribe if you aren't yet. Hit the like button. Yada, yada, yada.